I didn't cry. I just sat in the driveway with the engine still running, staring at the message on my phone like it was written in a language I almost recognized. It was my gardener, a man who had trimmed my hedges every second Saturday for 11 years, a man I had never once invited inside for coffee, a man whose last name I had to look up on the old checks I used to write him before he switched to e-transfer. He had sent me 3 words. Don't go in. Then, a few seconds later, I need to show you something first. I sat there in the car with the heat on, even though it was already April and the snow had melted weeks ago. My daughter had just texted me from the airport. Her flight to Vancouver was boarding. I had watched her walk through security, waved at her until she was past the point where she could still see me. I had driven home through the gray afternoon, feeling that particular kind of quiet that settles over you when the house is about to be empty again. And now, Gerald was standing at the side of my house, holding his phone out toward me, waiting. I turned off the engine. I had bought this house in 2009, after my husband passed. The kids thought I was being impulsive, selling the family home in Oakville and moving to a smaller place in Burlington. But I needed something that was mine alone. No ghosts in the hallways, no corner of the kitchen where I could still see him standing with his newspaper. The Burlington house had a proper garden in the back and a driveway lined with old spruce trees that turned orange in October, and it felt, from the first day I walked through it, like a place where I could breathe again. Gerald had been part of the package, in a way. He had worked for the previous owners and left a handwritten note in the mailbox asking if I wanted to keep him on. Something about that note, the careful cursive, the way he'd written "I take good care of things," made me say yes. He was a quiet man, 60s I guessed, though I never asked. Retired from something in manufacturing, I thought I remembered him saying once. He came on schedule, never asked for more money until the second year when gas prices went up, and whenever I thanked him too warmly, he would just nod and say that's what I'm here for and get back to whatever he was doing. We were not close, but I trusted him the way you trust a chair you've been sitting in for years without thinking about it. I got out of the car. He walked toward me without speaking, turned his phone around, and held it up so I could see the screen. It was a video. Security footage. From the look of it, the angle was from somewhere high up, and the image was slightly grainy, the way outdoor cameras always are in low light. When did you put up cameras? I asked. 3 weeks ago, he said. After somebody got into the Hendersons' garage on Glenwood. I put one on my truck, one on my front door. But I put one pointing at the street, just to be safe. He pressed play. The timestamp in the corner said the previous Tuesday. Mid-morning, my daughter's car was visible in my driveway. She'd been staying with me for 3 weeks while she waited for her new apartment in Vancouver to be ready. The front door of my house opened and a man walked out. He wasn't carrying anything obvious. He walked to the car parked on the street, not my daughter's, a darker one I didn't recognize, opened the door and drove away, unhurried, like he lived there. Who is that? I asked. Gerald looked at me for a moment. You didn't know he was in your house that morning? I shook my head. I had been at a cardiology follow-up at the hospital that Tuesday. My daughter had told me she was going to spend the morning working from home and then meet a friend for lunch. She said the house would be empty by noon. Gerald took the phone back. There's more, he said quietly. I didn't leave a note with a cup of tea that he's been there 4 times in the last 3 weeks. Always when you're out. I didn't say anything. The spruce trees at the end of the driveway made a low sound in the wind. He goes straight to your office, Gerald said. Every time. My office was where I kept everything. The filing cabinet with the insurance papers and the property documents. The binder my financial advisor at RBC had put together when I restructured everything after my husband died. The RIF, the TFSA, the 2 rental properties in Hamilton, my will, the power of attorney documents that I had updated 18 months ago when my cardiologist first mentioned that we needed to start thinking ahead. I had updated the power of attorney at my daughter's suggestion. I had named her. She had cried when I told her, said she was honored, said she hoped it would be a long time before it was ever needed. I stood in my driveway and I thought about all the times in the past 3 weeks she had asked me questions I hadn't thought twice about at the time. Where do you keep the deed for the Hamilton properties, Mom? Do you use the same accountant you've always used? What was the name of the trust company Dad used back in the 90s? I had answered all of them. I had felt grateful that she was taking an interest finally. She was 41 years old and I had spent years worrying that she didn't take money seriously enough. And here she was asking the right questions, and I had thought, maybe she's grown up. Gerald was watching me. He had the particular stillness of a man who has already processed his own shock and is now just waiting for you to process yours. Do you know who he is? I asked. I showed the footage to my nephew, he said. He said with that sort of thing, he found a LinkedIn profile. His name is Trevor Moss. He's a paralegal. The word landed in my chest like something cold, not a boyfriend she'd been hiding, not a friend she'd brought over without mentioning it. A paralegal. I looked at the house. The kitchen light was on. It was on a timer. It came on at 4, regardless. Everything looked exactly as it always did. The blue spruce in the front bed that I planted in memory of my husband. The welcome mat my granddaughter had given me that said, "So glad you're here." The window of my office, which faced the street, curtains drawn the way I always left them. I thought, how long has this been the plan? My daughter had been in and out of financial trouble for most of her adult life. Not dramatically. Not the kind of trouble you read about. More the quiet kind. The kind that accumulates without anyone saying it out loud. A marriage that ended badly and expensively. A business that didn't work out. A decade of borrowing against tomorrow and hoping tomorrow would be better. I had helped her over the years in the way that parents help, quietly, without keeping score, telling myself it was what family does. 18 months ago, she had sat down with me at my kitchen table and said she was worried about me. My heart had been giving me trouble, 2 minor episodes in 2 years, and she said she didn't want something to happen and find out there was no plan in place. She was calm and organized, and she brought a notepad with questions she'd written down in advance. I had been so moved by how prepared she was, how seriously she was taking it, that I had called my lawyer the following week. I sat down on the front step. I didn't notice I was going to until I was already sitting. Gerald sat down beside me, which surprised me. He had never done that before. We sat there in the April cold and I tried to build a clear picture of what had been happening in my own house while I was going to medical appointments and having lunch with friends and buying granola at the Fortino's down the road. How many times did you say? I asked. 4 that I caught. The camera only goes back 3 weeks. She had been staying with me for 3 weeks. I thought about the Tuesday I'd come home from the hospital and the house had felt different. Not wrong exactly, just slightly off-center, the way a room feels when someone's moved something you didn't ask them to move. I had chalked it up to being tired. I had made myself a cup of tea and watched the news and gone to bed. "Gerald," I said, "can you send me all of it?" He already had his phone out. I did not go inside that night. I just sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that to my closest friend since our children were in school together, and she has a spare room and she asked no questions until I was ready to talk. I sat in her kitchen with a glass of water and told her everything, and she sat across from me and listened the way she always has, which is quietly, without rushing to fill the silence. Then I called my lawyer. His name is David Chu, and I've used him for 20 years. He answers his personal cell after hours for clients he's known that long, and he answered on the third ring. I told him everything I had told Paulette. When I got to the part about the paralegal named Trevor Moss, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Don't touch anything in your office. Don't let her know you know, and come see me tomorrow morning at 8. I said, "How bad is it?" He said, "Come in and we'll go through it. But you caught it early. That matters." What I found out the next morning, sitting in David's office with the coffee I didn't touch, was this. My daughter had made 2 attempts in the past 3 weeks to initiate a transfer of one of the Hamilton properties into a numbered company that had been registered in Alberta 6 weeks earlier. Both attempts had failed because a co-signature was required. Mine, which she didn't have. Trevor Moss, the paralegal, had been attempting to locate the original deed and assess whether there were any gaps in the documentation that might be exploitable. There weren't. But that wasn't from lack of trying. She had also accessed my online banking. I had made the mistake of letting her help me set up the app on my new phone 2 months earlier, and I had not realized she had watched me enter my password. She had not moved any money. She had been looking at balances, tracing the landscape, figuring out what was there before she made a move. David said the power of attorney was not yet an issue because I was of sound mind and the document had not been misused yet, but he recommended I revoke it immediately and draw up a new one naming someone outside the family. I said, "Who?" He said, "Think about it. Someone you trust who has no financial stake in your estate." I thought about it for about 4 seconds. I called Gerald from the parking lot of David's office. I told him what had happened and what David had recommended. There was a long pause, and then he said, "I don't know anything about legal documents." I said, "You don't need to. You just need to be someone I trust." Another pause. Then, "I'll do whatever you need." The harder part was my daughter. I did not confront her immediately. David advised against it. He wanted the documentation secured first, the accounts locked down, the POA revoked, and replaced before she had any reason to suspect the game was up. I spent 4 days going about my regular life, calling her at her Vancouver hotel the way I normally would, asking about the apartment, listening to her talk about the new job. I was calm. I had always been good at being calm when it mattered. My husband used to say that I was the person you wanted in a room when things went sideways. On the 5th day, David called to say everything was in place. The accounts were secured. The new POA was signed and filed. The numbered company in Alberta had been flagged with the appropriate parties. Trevor Moss had been sent a formal notice from David's office. David said that depending on how far they'd gotten, there might be grounds for a criminal complaint, and that I should think about whether I wanted to pursue it. I said I needed a few days to think about that part. Then I called my daughter. I didn't tell her on the phone. I told her I needed to talk to her and that she should come back to Burlington when she could. She asked if everything was okay. I said I'd been having some health concerns and I wanted to sit down with her in person. She booked a flight for the following Thursday. I spent that week going through my files, the real ones, the ones Trevor Moss had been trying to access. Everything was intact. My husband's portrait was still on the corner of my desk, the same place it had been for 14 years. I sat in my office chair and I looked at it for a long time. I thought about the early years, when money had been tight and we'd had 2 children and a mortgage, and there had been no cushion at all, and how we had both worked to build something careful and solid, because we'd promised each other we would. I thought about how much of what I had was his work too, his discipline, his 30 years at his company, and how much it would have hurt him to know what was happening in the house we bought together, in the room where his photograph sat. I wasn't angry at my daughter. I know that might sound strange. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe anyone who's been a parent for 40 years understands that love and grief can sit right beside each other without either one canceling the other out. I was sad. The kind of sad that isn't loud or sharp, but just settles in and stays. She arrived on Thursday evening. I had made dinner, nothing elaborate, just a roast chicken and the potato soup she'd liked since she was small. We ate together and she told me about Vancouver and I listened and refilled her water glass and waited. After dinner, I told her to come sit with me in the living room. I had the footage on my laptop. I turned it toward her and pressed play without saying anything. She watched herself unlock my front door with the key she'd had cut without asking me. She watched the man she'd hired. I know now it had been going on since before she arrived to stay, that she had been planning it for at least 4 months. Walk through my hallway toward my office. She watched it all without speaking, and when it ended, she closed her eyes. She said, "Mom." I said, "I know." She said, "I was going to pay it back. I was going to." I said, "I know," because I did know. I knew that she had told herself a story about what she was doing, that she wasn't really stealing, that she was just borrowing, that she would fix it before I noticed, that I had more than I needed anyway, that it was practically hers someday. I knew that story because I had watched her tell herself versions of it her whole life. It was the story that let her cash the checks without feeling what she was doing. I told her what David had done. I told her about the accounts, the numbered company, Trevor Moss. I told her the power of attorney had been revoked. She started to cry. I handed her a tissue and waited. She asked if I was going to press charges. I told her I hadn't decided. That part was still true. I still haven't, if I'm being honest. David says I have time. He says the documentation is preserved and the option is open. My son, he lives in Ottawa. He's taken this harder than anyone. Says I should. He called me the night I finally told him and he was angrier than I've heard him in 30 years. He said it wasn't just about me, that she needed real consequences, that this would keep happening otherwise. He may be right. What I decided immediately, without any uncertainty, was that she could no longer be in my home unsupervised, that the key I hadn't even known she'd copied had to be returned, that the access to my accounts, my documents, my life, all of it had to be restructured around the simple fact that I could not trust her with it. That's a sentence that took me 63 years of loving her to be able to say clearly, and I am still getting used to the weight of it. Gerald came the following Saturday. Same time as always, second Saturday of the month. I watched him from the kitchen window as he went around the side of the house to the shed, got out his tools, and started on the beds along the back fence where the perennials were just starting to push up through the soil. After a while, I made 2 cups of tea and brought them out. He looked surprised. I had never done that before. We stood at the back of the garden with our cups, and he told me about the Henderson break-in, which had turned out to be a pair of teenagers from a neighborhood a few kilometers over and had been dealt with by the police without much drama. I told him my daughter had gone back to Vancouver. He nodded. I said, "I want you to know that I understand what it cost you to tell me. It would have been easier to say nothing." He looked down at his cup. "I thought about that," he said, "about whether it was my business. What made you decide it was?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've been good to me for 11 years. That makes it my business." I didn't have anything to say to that. We stood there until our tea was gone, looking out at the garden, at the things coming back up through the cold ground in the slow, reliable way they always do this time of year, whether or not you're watching. I keep coming back to the moment I sat down on my own front step without meaning to, not because it was dramatic. It wasn't, not on the outside. I just sat down, and something in me understood that I had been sitting down in a different way for a long time, quietly lowering my expectations, quietly explaining away the things that didn't add up, quietly telling myself that love was supposed to feel like that. What Gerald did that afternoon wasn't complicated. He saw something wrong and he said so. That's all. But I've been thinking about how rare that actually is. How many people would have looked at that footage and decided it wasn't their place, decided the awkwardness wasn't worth it, decided that whatever was happening between a mother and her daughter was none of their business. He had every reason to stay out of it. He chose not to. That kind of decency isn't loud or impressive. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up on a Tuesday with a phone in hand and says, "I thought you should know." And my daughter, I don't think she started out intending to become the kind of person who would do this. I think she made one small compromise, then another, and then another. And at some point, the story she was telling herself had drifted so far from the truth that she couldn't find her way back without help. That's not an excuse, but it's the thing I sit with, because understanding how it happens is different from forgiving it, and I've had to learn to hold both at once. What I know is this: the choices we make, especially the quiet ones, the ones nobody sees, have a way of compounding. Gerald's choice to act with integrity over 11 years built something between us that neither of us had a name for, and when the moment came, that unnamed thing was exactly what protected me. My daughter's choices, made in private, in borrowed minutes in my office while I was at a medical appointment, built something too. It just built in the other direction. I think about the kind of person it takes to do what Gerald did. Not just the honesty, but the clarity to recognize what he was seeing and trust his own judgment enough to act on it. He didn't panic. He didn't gossip. He documented carefully, thought it through, consulted someone he trusted, and then came to me directly. That's not instinct. That's a kind of wisdom that gets built slowly, through years of paying attention and doing things the right way even when it's inconvenient. And I think about what it cost me. The years of not quite looking, the willingness to believe a comfortable story because the uncomfortable one was too hard. There is a particular kind of strength required to see clearly when you love someone. I didn't have it for a long time. I'm working on it now. The garden is coming in well this spring. The perennials along the back fence are fuller than they've been in years. Gerald came last Saturday and we had tea again. Second time now. It's becoming something, quietly, the way good things usually do. I didn't leave a free thing. I caught it in time. But I think the more honest thing to say is, I was caught by a man with a camera on his truck and enough backbone to walk across the driveway and show me what I needed to see. The rest, the lawyer, the accounts, the locked files, that was just paperwork. The real thing happened in those 2 minutes on the front step when I finally stopped explaining and just looked.